The massive Zorvan warship Inevitable Conquest hung in Earth's orbit like a jagged obsidian dagger against the velvet of space, its hull adorned with the battle scars of 100 subjugated worlds. Admiral Krestol stood on the observation deck, 6 elongated digits tapping impatiently against the crystalline viewport as he studied the blue-green planet below with his 3 primary eyes. The Zorvan Confederation had conquered 17 solar systems through superior firepower and unquestioning hierarchical obedience, but something about this Earth troubled the Admiral deeply. Their preliminary scans had revealed a species that, by all logical assessment, should have annihilated itself centuries ago. Humans were territorial, competitive, and fractious, yet somehow they had built a global civilization without the rigid dominance hierarchies that formed the backbone of every successful spacefaring species the Zorvans had encountered. Even more baffling were the intercepted transmissions showing humans engaged in what the xenoanthropologists tentatively labeled as cooperation without subjugation, a concept so alien to Zorvan understanding that many of the science officers had dismissed it as elaborate deception. "Commander Jackson is being brought aboard now, Admiral," announced Lieutenant Vriss, her exoskeleton clicking softly as she approached. The humans had surprisingly agreed to send a representative after the Zorvans had accidentally vaporized a small uninhabited island as a demonstration of power, a standard first contact protocol that, rather than inspiring the expected terrified submission, had instead prompted a calm request for diplomatic dialogue. Admiral Krestol had initially planned to simply scan the human's brain and then proceed with the conquest, but High Command had unexpectedly ordered a full assessment of human psychology before invasion, unprecedented caution that suggested even the supreme hierarchs were unsettled by humanity's strange social dynamics. The airlock hissed open, and in walked a human female of average height, her posture relaxed despite being surrounded by armed Zorvan guards. Dr. Eleanor Mitchell, behavioral psychologist, she introduced herself with a slight bow that the xenologists had hastily advised was a gesture of respect rather than submission. "I understand you have questions about how we organize ourselves." The Admiral's translation implant rendered her words perfectly, but her calm demeanor in the face of certain planetary doom confounded him. Where was the fear? The desperate bargaining? The submission displays that every other species exhibited when confronted with Zorvan might? "You face extinction, yet you appear unconcerned," Admiral Krestol stated flatly, all 3 eyes fixed intently on her face to detect deception. Dr. Mitchell smiled, another expression the Zorvans found difficult to interpret, and replied, "Admiral, I believe we're experiencing a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of power and cooperation. I've been authorized to offer you something no other species has before." The Admiral's secondary heart quickened with suspicion as Dr. Mitchell reached slowly into her pocket, the guards instantly raising their plasma lances. She carefully extracted a small data crystal and held it up. "This contains our complete history of conflict resolution studies, game theory mathematics, and psychological research on cooperative systems. We call it win-win negotiation, a concept I suspect might be revolutionary to your understanding of interspecies relations." Lieutenant Vriss made a dismissive clicking sound with her mandibles. "Psychological manipulation. The humans seek to delay the inevitable." But Admiral Krestol felt an unfamiliar sensation, curiosity, as he studied the diminutive crystal. The Zorvan Confederation had conquered through superior technology and rigid hierarchy for millennia, yet their advancement had plateaued in recent centuries despite, or perhaps because of, their military successes. Something about this human's confident offering of knowledge rather than surrender tugged at questions long buried in the Admiral's analytical mind. "Your species' transmissions reveal constant internal conflict," he challenged, "yet you have not destroyed yourselves. Explain this contradiction." Dr. Mitchell's eyes lit up with an enthusiasm that the translation implant couldn't quite contextualize. "That's precisely what makes human psychology so fascinating, Admiral. Our conflicts drive innovation rather than destruction because we've developed systems that channel competition into collective benefit. Would you permit me to demonstrate with a simple experiment involving your command staff?" The request was so unexpected, so contrary to all conquest protocols, that Admiral Krestol found himself nodding before his strategic mind could object. As Dr. Mitchell began arranging the officers into what she called a cooperative problem-solving exercise, the Admiral couldn't shake the disturbing feeling that this encounter was veering dangerously from the inevitable conquest's usual path, and even more disturbing was his growing desire to understand where this new path might lead. The command deck of the inevitable conquest had been transformed into what Dr. Mitchell called a workshop space, much to the visible discomfort of the Zorvan officers whose rigid postures and twitching sensory appendages betrayed their unease at this breach of military protocol. Lieutenant Vriss had vocally objected until silenced by a curt gesture from Admiral Krestol, whose scientific curiosity had momentarily overridden his conquest programming. This exercise, Dr. Mitchell explained as she arranged 12 high-ranking Zorvans into groups, demonstrates how competing interests can align without hierarchical enforcement. She placed a complex three-dimensional puzzle constructed from interlocking metals at the center of each group. Each team has identical puzzles with different solutions. The first team to solve theirs gains significant status, which I understand matters greatly to Zorvans, but if all teams solve their puzzles within the time limit, everyone receives a greater reward. The Admiral watched with growing fascination as the teams initially approached the task with their typical dominance behaviors, the highest-ranked officer attempting to direct all actions while subordinates competed for secondary control positions. But as minutes passed, something extraordinary happened. The puzzles were deliberately designed to require multiple perspectives and collaborative manipulation, making hierarchy actively detrimental to success. Team 2, led by Commander Drathmore, was the first to abandon their rigid command structure, with the commander unexpectedly yielding to the spatial insights of a junior weapons officer. What followed astonished the watching Admiral. Their efficiency increased exponentially. Across the room, Team 1 remained locked in dominance disputes and made minimal progress, while Team 3 had devolved into punitive corrections against lower-ranked members who dared suggest alternative approaches. Observe the outcomes of different organizational methods, Dr. Mitchell noted quietly beside the Admiral. No enforcement was required to demonstrate which approach works better. By the exercise's end, only Team 2 had completed their puzzle, and the triumphant expressions on their faces, especially the junior officer whose contributions had been pivotal, revealed a satisfaction that transcended mere obedience to authority. Admiral Krestol's tertiary brain lobe, responsible for complex pattern analysis, was practically throbbing with activity. An interesting demonstration, he conceded, but military operations require clear command structures. Your cooperative approach would fail when facing determined enemies. Dr. Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps that's why we've developed different organizational systems for different contexts. Our military maintains chain of command during combat but encourages collaborative innovation during planning and development. Flexibility of structure is our strength, not our weakness. The discussion was abruptly interrupted when the ship's sensors detected an approaching vessel, triggering automatic battle stations. Crixian scout ship, reported the tactical officer, mandibles clicking in anticipation. They violated our territorial claim to this system. The Crixians, semi-aquatic beings known for opportunistic raiding, had been a persistent irritant to Zorvan expansion, never powerful enough to threaten them but adept at exploiting momentary vulnerabilities. Standard elimination protocol, inquired Commander Drathmore, already moving toward the weapons console. Admiral Krestol hesitated, his gaze shifting between the approaching vessel and Dr. Mitchell, who stood observing with remarkable composure. What would humans do in this situation? He asked, surprising himself with the question. Dr. Mitchell considered for a moment. We'd likely establish communication first. The Crixians may not know you've claimed this system, or they might be here for reasons unrelated to your presence. Information gathering before action prevents unnecessary conflict. Lieutenant Vriss made a scoffing sound. Weakness disguised as wisdom. The Crixians respect only force. Yet the Admiral found himself issuing an unexpected order, hail the Crixian vessel. The command deck fell silent, officers exchanging bewildered glances at this deviation from protocol. When the Crixian captain, a blue-scaled humanoid with gill ridges pulsing in obvious anxiety, appeared on the communication screen, Admiral Krestol experienced another first, a diplomatic exchange with a species the Zorvans had always considered beneath negotiation. More surprising still was the revelation that the Crictians had detected unusual energy signatures from Earth and were investigating potential trade opportunities rather than raiding prospects. As the conversation concluded with an unprecedented agreement to share the system temporarily, Dr. Mitchell leaned close to the Admiral and murmured, "Consider how much Zorvan resources have been expended on eliminating Crixian nuisances over the centuries. Now imagine if those resources had been directed toward mutual advancement instead." Admiral Krestol's primary heart felt strangely arrhythmic as he gazed at the stars beyond the viewport, centuries of unquestioned conquest doctrines suddenly seeming less inevitable than the ship's name proclaimed. "I require more information about these human cooperative systems," he decided, turning his three eyes toward Dr. Mitchell with an intensity that made his officers shift nervously. "Perhaps a longer demonstration is warranted." 5 Earth days had passed since Dr. Mitchell's arrival aboard the inevitable Conquest, and Admiral Krestol found himself in the unprecedented position of hosting not only the human psychologist but also a delegation of 4 additional specialists she had requested from Earth: Dr. Marcus Reynolds, an expert in organizational systems; Commander Olivia Blackwell, a veteran military strategist; Professor Douglas Hamilton, a game theory mathematician; and Dr. Thomas Wilson, a cultural anthropologist. The Zorvan High Command had reluctantly approved this unorthodox cultural exchange after reviewing the initial reports, though their transmission had contained clear warnings about maintaining conquest readiness. The ship's largest tactical planning chamber had been converted into what the humans called a conference room, with the hierarchical seating arrangements flattened to allow for circular discussion, a spatial reconfiguration that visibly disturbed many of the Zorvan officers but that Dr. Mitchell insisted was essential for the demonstration of collaborative intelligence. "The fundamental misunderstanding," Professor Hamilton was explaining as he manipulated a holographic display showing complex mathematical models, "is your assumption that competition and cooperation are mutually exclusive. Human societies discover that properly structured competition within cooperative frameworks produces greater innovation than either pure competition or pure hierarchy." Lieutenant Vriss, who had appointed herself the defender of Zorvan traditions, interrupted with a harsh clicking sound. "Your theories contradict biological imperatives. Dominance hierarchies exist throughout nature, they are not cultural constructs but evolutionary necessities." Dr. Wilson nodded thoughtfully. "Many Earth species also organize through dominance hierarchies, Lieutenant. What makes humans different is our metacognitive ability. We can recognize our instinctual patterns and consciously design systems that channel them productively rather than destructively." The discussion was interrupted by the ship's alert system. "Admiral," reported the communications officer, mandibles twitching anxiously, "we've received an emergency transmission from Colony Outpost Drex 9. They're under attack by unknown forces. Initial reports suggest possible Mavorian involvement." A ripple of tension spread through the Zorvan officers. The Mavorians, a highly advanced species that had thus far remained neutral toward Zorvan expansion, represented a potential threat that even the Confederation's military strategists approached with caution. Admiral Krestol immediately straightened into battle posture. "Prepare jump coordinates. Standard conquest protocol dictates immediate show of maximum force." Before the navigation officer could comply, Commander Blackwell spoke up. "Admiral, if I may? Based on the limited information available, a full warship response might escalate what could be a localized conflict or even a misunderstanding." The Admiral's tertiary eyes swiveled toward her. "Explain your reasoning, human." Commander Blackwell approached the tactical display. "Mavorians have historically avoided direct confrontation with major powers. If they're attacking a Zorvan colony, either they believe they've developed sufficient technological advantage to win a full-scale war, which seems unlikely given their cautious nature, or there's another explanation we're missing. I'd recommend sending a stealth assessment craft first to gather intelligence before committing your flagship." The tactical logic was sound, yet it contradicted centuries of Zorvan military doctrine that emphasized overwhelming force as the primary response to any threat. The Admiral found himself torn between ingrained protocols and the intriguing alternative approach. "Your suggestion has merit," he acknowledged reluctantly. "Commander Drathmore, prepare a stealth vessel for immediate deployment." The command deck erupted in shocked clicking and mandible chattering at this unprecedented deviation from standard protocol. Lieutenant Vriss approached the Admiral, her exoskeleton rigid with barely contained outrage. Admiral, this directly contravenes High Command directives. The humans are manipulating you toward weakness. Our dominance must be unquestioned and immediate. Admiral Crestol regarded his loyal lieutenant with all three eyes. Is it weakness to gather intelligence before action, Lieutenant? Or efficiency? The stealth vessel returned 12 hours later with surprising findings. The attack on Drex 9 was actually a mining dispute between Zorvan colonists and a small Mavorian scientific outpost that had been established in the same system years earlier but had gone unnoticed in Zorvan records. What had initially appeared as weapons fire was the result of automated mining equipment interference. Meanwhile, aboard the inevitable Conquest, Dr. Reynolds had organized a series of what he called departmental cross-pollination sessions, where Zorvan specialists from different ship sections were encouraged to share knowledge across traditional hierarchical boundaries. The engineering team had already identified 17 potential efficiency improvements by consulting with life support technicians who understood system interactions that had previously been compartmentalized by rank. This is how Earth went from primitive flight to landing on our moon in less than 70 years, Dr. Reynolds explained to a fascinated group of junior officers. Knowledge flows freely across hierarchies, allowing innovations to emerge from unexpected sources. As the Admiral observed these sessions from the doorway, he noticed something disturbing yet fascinating. The younger Zorvans were adapting to these human methodologies with alarming enthusiasm, while the older, higher-ranked officers watched with increasing concern. The implications were unsettling. If cooperation truly proved more efficient than hierarchy, the entire foundation of Zorvan civilization, and his own authority, could be at risk. That night, as the ship's lighting dimmed to simulate nocturnal cycles, Admiral Crestol received an encrypted direct transmission from High Command. The Supreme Hierarch's face filled the private screen in his quarters, mandibles arranged in the formal pattern denoting severe displeasure. Admiral, the Hierarch began without preamble, your reports indicate dangerous deviation from Conquest protocols. Some members of the Command Council suggest you have been compromised by human psychological tactics. You will terminate this cultural exchange immediately and proceed with planetary subjugation as originally ordered. The Admiral felt his primary heart race as he contemplated his response, suddenly aware that for the first time in his distinguished career, he was considering defying a direct order from his supreme authority. The human concepts had infected his thinking more deeply than he had realized, and the most troubling part was that he wasn't entirely convinced this infection was harmful to the Zorvan future. Terminal breach in Section 14. Atmospheric decompression imminent. The emergency alert shattered the ship's night cycle, sending officers scrambling to battle stations. Admiral Crestol, who had been contemplating the Supreme Hierarch's ultimatum, rushed to the command deck to find chaos, warning lights flashing across every system display as Lieutenant Vriss coordinated the emergency response teams. Containment fields failing, reported the system's officer, his mandibles chattering in distress. Unknown energy signature detected within the breach zone. The Admiral surveyed the situation with practiced efficiency. "'Cause of breach?" "Sabotage," Lieutenant Vriss answered grimly. Security footage shows Commander Drathmore accessing the hull integrity controls shortly before the breach. He's missing from his station. The implication was clear and disturbing. Internal dissent had escalated to outright sabotage. Drathmore had been among the officers most receptive to the human cooperative models, and his betrayal confirmed the lieutenant's warnings about human psychological manipulation. Or at least, that was the immediate conclusion every Zorvan officer drew. "Seal all bulkheads and deploy repair drones," Admiral Crestol ordered, a cold determination settling in his three hearts. "And locate our human guests. Immediately." To his surprise, the human delegation arrived on the command deck moments later, led by Dr. Mitchell and Commander Blackwell, both looking concerned but composed. "Admiral," Commander Blackwell addressed him directly, bypassing the proper chain of command in a way that made several officers hiss in disapproval. "We've analyzed the energy signature from the breach. It matches Crixian stealth technology. This wasn't internal sabotage." Lieutenant Vriss's exoskeleton rattled in anger. "Absurd. Commander Drathmore's loyalty was compromised by your subversive ideas about cooperation undermining proper hierarchy. Now he attempts to destroy us from within." As accusations flew across the command deck, Professor Hamilton stepped forward, holding up a data pad. "Admiral, please examine these calculations." The breach pattern is consistent with external penetration, not internal sabotage. And the timing coincides precisely with your encrypted communication from High Command. A chilling possibility formed in the Admiral's mind. You suggest that the Crictions intercepted High Command's transmission coordinates? More than that, Dr. Mitchell added quietly. We believe someone within your High Command may have provided those coordinates deliberately. Someone who feels threatened by the ideas we've been sharing. The accusation was so outrageous, so fundamentally contradictory to Zorvan's societal structure, that Admiral Krestol nearly ordered the humans confined for sedition. But his tertiary brain, the analytical lobe that had been increasingly active since the humans' arrival, noted the mathematical precision of Hamilton's analysis. "Where's Commander Drathmore now?" he demanded. "In maintenance shaft 22B, answered Dr. Wilson, who had been quietly working with a tablet device. He's attempting to manually reroute power to the compromised section. Our structural engineer Dr. Reynolds is with him." The Admiral's perception shifted dramatically. He's not fleeing, he's trying to save the ship. Even as they processed this revelation, the emergency lights flickered and stabilized as power rerouted successfully. Commander Drathmore's voice crackled over the communication system. "Breach contained, Admiral." Dr. Reynolds identified a bypass protocol in our engineering manuals that none of us had considered. Without his cross-disciplinary knowledge, we would have lost the entire section. Lieutenant Vriss's mandibles twitched in confusion as her certainty visibly wavered. But the security footage clearly showed exactly what someone wanted us to see, Commander Blackwell interrupted, stepping toward the tactical display. Classic misdirection. While you focused on internal threats, 3 Crixian stealth vessels have taken position around your ship. She manipulated the display to reveal faint energy signatures that Zorvan sensors had categorized as background radiation but that, when recalibrated according to human detection parameters, clearly revealed the hostile vessels. The Admiral faced a momentous decision. Standard Zorvan protocol dictated immediate aggressive response against the Crictions, yet the humans had demonstrated repeatedly that standard protocols had critical blind spots. "Your recommendation, Commander Blackwell?" he asked, stunning the Zorvan officers with this unprecedented consultation of an alien during combat operations. "They expect you to follow Zorvan battle doctrine, immediate overwhelming force," she replied. "But they've positioned themselves to exploit the predictability of that response. I recommend instead a diplomatic hail combined with a subtle power redistribution to your defensive systems rather than weapons." The command deck fell silent as all eyes turned to Admiral Krestol. His primary heart urged traditional aggression, his secondary heart feared the loss of proper hierarchy, but his tertiary brain, the analytical engine of his consciousness, recognized the strategic soundness of this unconventional approach. "Proceed with Commander Blackwell's recommendation," he ordered finally. As the power systems reconfigured and the communications officer prepared a diplomatic channel, Lieutenant Vriss approached the Admiral, her posture conflicted. "Admiral," she said quietly, "the Supreme Hierarch's orders regarding the human delegation." Admiral Krestol gazed at the tactical display, watching as the Crixian vessels adjusted their positions in clear preparation for the attack pattern they anticipated, an attack that would not come. "Tell the Supreme Hierarch," he replied with newfound certainty, "that I am conducting a strategic assessment of unprecedented significance to the Confederation's future. The human delegation will remain until this assessment is complete." As the words left his mouth, Admiral Krestol recognized that he had just committed the ultimate breach of Zorvan protocol. He had defied direct orders from the highest authority. Yet somehow, this act of hierarchical rebellion felt not like chaos, but like evolution. The repercussions of Admiral Krestol's defiance reverberated through the inevitable conquest with the force of a quantum shock wave. 2 standard weeks had passed since the Crixian attack, during which the Admiral had not only maintained the human delegation aboard his ship but had expanded their influence, implementing experimental cooperative command structures throughout non-critical systems. The results were undeniable: efficiency increases of 27% in engineering, 35% in resource allocation, and an unprecedented 42% improvement in problem-solving metrics across departments where hierarchical barriers had been temporarily suspended. Most disturbing to traditionalists like Lieutenant Vriss was the emergence of what Dr. Mitchell termed voluntary leadership, Zorvans of various ranks spontaneously organizing around specific challenges based on expertise rather than position, then dissolving these temporary structures once objectives were achieved. "It's chaos," Vriss insisted during a heated command staff meeting, her exoskeleton plates clicking agitatedly. "These humans have infected our crew with organizational anarchy. When the Supreme Hierarch's enforcement fleet arrives, we will all face dissolution for this heresy against proper order." The enforcement fleet was indeed coming, 3 massive dreadnoughts dispatched from the Zorvan homeworld with explicit orders to remove Admiral Krestol from command, eliminate the human delegation, and proceed with Earth's conquest as originally planned. Rather than attempting to flee or prepare for battle, however, the Admiral had made the baffling decision to remain in Earth orbit and continue the cultural exchange program as if High Command's displeasure were merely a minor administrative inconvenience. "The Hierarch misunderstands our purpose," Admiral Krestol explained to his increasingly divided command staff. "We are not abandoning hierarchy but evolving it. The humans have demonstrated that appropriate organizational flexibility creates strength, not weakness." Dr. Mitchell, who had been quietly observing from the edge of the command deck, approached the tactical display where the incoming Zorvan fleet's trajectory glowed ominously. "Admiral, perhaps it's time we shared with you the real reason we've been so open to this exchange." All 3 of the Admiral's eyes fixed on her with sudden intensity. "Explain." Commander Blackwell stepped forward, activating a data crystal that projected a 3-dimensional star chart highlighting a region of space beyond Zorvan-explored territory. "Our long-range observatories detected these anomalies 6 Earth months ago. We believe they represent an incoming force of unprecedented scale, likely the Nexari Empire that both our civilizations have encountered only in ancient historical records." The Admiral's primary heart nearly stopped. The Nexari, a legendary expansionist force that had vanished from known space 5,000 years ago after nearly conquering the galaxy. Their return had been theorized in Zorvan military academies as the ultimate worst-case scenario, a threat so overwhelming that even the Confederation's military might would be insufficient. "Your instruments must be mistaken," Lieutenant Vriss insisted, but the tremor in her mandibles betrayed her uncertainty. Professor Hamilton shook his head. "We've confirmed the signatures through multiple detection methods. Conservative estimates suggest a fleet at least 20 times larger than the combined military forces of all known spacefaring species in this sector. They will reach the outer boundaries of Zorvan space within 6 standard months." Admiral Krestol's tactical mind immediately grasped the implications. "This is why you've been so accommodating of our presence in your system. You seek alliance against a common enemy." Dr. Mitchell's expression remained calm, but her eyes reflected a deeper concern. "Not merely alliance, Admiral. We seek a fundamental transformation of interspecies relations. The Nexari were historically unstoppable because they exploited the inability of hierarchical species to coordinate effectively across cultural boundaries. Humanity's greatest strength, our ability to form cooperative systems that transcend traditional power structures, may be the only effective counter to their strategy." The command deck fell silent as the implications settled over the assembled officers. Commander Drathmore, who had emerged as the strongest advocate for human methodologies among the Zorvan leadership, finally spoke. "The enforcement fleet arrives in 26 hours, Admiral. If they succeed in their mission, not only will Earth be conquered, but the knowledge we need to face the Nexari will be lost." Admiral Krestol stood motionless, his 3 hearts beating in conflicted rhythms as he faced the most consequential decision of his long military career. The Zorvan Confederation had survived for millennia through strict adherence to hierarchy and the unquestioned execution of orders from above. To reject those principles meant rejecting the very foundation of his civilization. Yet as he studied the projected path of the Nexari fleet, he recognized with growing clarity that traditional Zorvan responses would be catastrophically inadequate against such a threat. "We will not flee," he announced finally, his voice resonating with newfound conviction. "Nor will we prepare for battle against our own kind. Instead, we will present the enforcement fleet with the complete data regarding the Nexari threat, along with our findings on human cooperative methodologies. If they cannot recognize the strategic necessity of adaptation, then the Zorvan Confederation faces extinction regardless of whether Earth falls." As if responding to his declaration, the ship's communication system suddenly activated, displaying an incoming transmission not from the approaching enforcement fleet but from somewhere much farther away. The visual stabilized to reveal a being unlike any the humans had encountered, a Mavorian High Council member, its crystalline sensory structures pulsating with obvious agitation. Admiral Krestol, the Mavorian began without preamble. Our deep space monitoring networks have confirmed what we believe your human allies have already detected. The Nexari return is no longer theoretical but imminent. The High Council has voted to initiate preliminary diplomatic contact with all major powers in this sector, beginning with your vessel due to its proximity to Earth. The Admiral exchanged a significant glance with Dr. Mitchell before responding. Your timing is fortuitous, Counselor. We are currently engaged in a revolutionary exchange of organizational methodologies with the humans. Perhaps you would consider sending representatives to participate? The Mavorian's crystalline features shifted in what might have been surprise. The Zorvan Confederation is voluntarily engaging in cultural exchange? Without conquest objectives? Admiral Krestol felt a strange sensation that his human guests might have identified as ironic amusement. Indeed, Counselor. It appears that in the face of extinction, even the most rigid hierarchies can learn to adapt. As the communication ended, Lieutenant Vriss approached the Admiral, her posture communicating deep internal conflict. Admiral, if the Supreme Hierarch proceeds with your removal despite the Nexari threat, then, Admiral Krestol finished quietly, we will have confirmed that our civilization's greatest vulnerability is not external but internal, our inability to evolve beyond the very hierarchical structures that once ensured our survival but now threaten to prevent our adaptation when we need it most. As if to punctuate his statement, the ship's sensors detected multiple new vessels entering the system, not just the expected Zorvan enforcement fleet, but also ships of Crixian, Mavorian, and several other species design, all converging on Earth orbit in response to the looming threat that would soon require a response unlike any the galaxy had previously imagined. The space surrounding Earth had transformed into an unprecedented interspecies gathering, 17 vessels representing 9 different civilizations now orbited the blue planet in a loose formation that military historians would later term the First Confluence. At the center of this impromptu alliance floated the inevitable conquest, its obsidian hull now adorned with hastily installed communication arrays designed by a joint human-Mavorian engineering team to facilitate cross-species tactical coordination. On the ship's expanded command deck, Admiral Krestol faced the holographic visage of Supreme Hierarch Dozenkroth, whose mandibles were arranged in the formal pattern denoting absolute authority. Your actions constitute the highest form of treason, Admiral, the Hierarch declared, his voice resonating with millennia of unquestioned dominance. You have not only defied direct orders but have contaminated multiple Zorvan crews with human psychological deviancy. The enforcement fleet will board your vessel in 6 hours. You will surrender the human delegation for immediate termination and submit yourself for hierarchical dissolution. Admiral Krestol stood tall, flanked not just by his Zorvan officers but also by representatives from each species now gathered in Earth orbit, a visual representation of the very cooperative alliance he was advocating. Supreme Hierarch, he responded with surprising calmness, I transmit now comprehensive data regarding the approaching Nexari force, along with preliminary analysis of how human cooperative methodologies might be essential to our collective survival. The data streamed toward the enforcement fleet, containing not just the astronomical observations confirming the Nexari approach but also detailed performance metrics from the inevitable conquest showing the dramatic improvements achieved through implemented human organizational theories. The Hierarch's secondary eyes narrowed in suspicion. These readings could be falsified. The humans have clearly compromised your cognitive functions, the data is independently verified, interrupted a new voice as a Crixian captain stepped into the holographic projection field. Our long-range scouts have confirmed the Nexari signatures. They approach with a force that would overwhelm even the entire Zorvan Confederation fleet. Before the Hierarch could respond, a Mavorian counselor joined the conversation. The High Council has analyzed all available information and calculated a 94.7% probability that traditional military responses will fail against the Nexari strategy. Only through unprecedented interspecies cooperation do we identify a viable resistance pathway. Supreme Hierarch Dozenkroth's mandibles clicked in agitation as more alien representatives added their confirmations. The enforcement fleet's commander, Admiral Vextor, appeared in a separate holographic window, his posture communicating clear distress. Supreme Hierarch, our own science division has completed analysis of the transmitted data. The Nexari signatures appear authentic. For perhaps the first time in recorded Zorvan history, a supreme hierarch found himself faced with a united opposition from multiple fronts, a situation so alien to their hierarchical culture that no protocol existed to address it. After several moments of tense silence, Dr. Mitchell stepped forward. Supreme Hierarch, may I suggest a compromise that preserves Zorvan authority while allowing exploration of potentially crucial survival strategies? All eyes turned to the human psychologist, whose calm demeanor had become a stabilizing presence aboard the inevitable Conquest. The Nexary threat provides an opportunity to test competing organizational models under controlled conditions. Designate Admiral Cresthol's ship as an experimental tactical unit with temporary exemption from standard hierarchical requirements. If our methods fail, you lose nothing. If they succeed, the Zorvan Confederation gains a powerful new strategic advantage. Lieutenant Vriss, who had been silent throughout the exchange, suddenly straightened her exoskeleton in formal advisory posture. Supreme Hierarch, as the designated traditional counterbalance aboard this vessel, I can report that while these human methodologies are deeply disturbing to proper Zorvan sensibilities, their tactical efficacy cannot be dismissed. I recommend provisional exploration of these concepts under strict observation. The recommendation from this staunch traditionalist clearly shocked the hierarch, whose three eyes blinked in rapid succession as he processed this unexpected development. Meanwhile, aboard the lead enforcement vessel, Admiral Vextor was receiving his own stream of reports from subordinate officers who had analyzed the inevitable Conquest's performance metrics, reports indicating efficiency improvements that, if legitimate, would revolutionize Zorvan military capability. A test scenario, the Supreme Hierarch finally declared, mandibles arranged in reluctant concession. Admiral Crestol will retain provisional command of the inevitable Conquest as an experimental unit. Admiral Vextor will integrate his enforcement fleet into this cooperative alliance while maintaining traditional Zorvan protocols aboard his own vessels. We will compare effectiveness directly when the Nexary arrive. As the communication ended, the command deck erupted in a cacophony of multi-species vocalizations, clicks, whistles, crystalline resonances, and human exclamations, all blending into what Commander Blackwell Riley termed the sound of evolutionary pressure forcing cooperation. The real work began immediately. Professor Hamilton established what he called cross-cultural translation matrices to help different species understand not just each other's languages but their fundamental psychological frameworks. Dr. Reynolds organized interspecies engineering teams to develop compatible weapon systems and defensive technologies. Commander Blackwell initiated tactical simulations incorporating the unique strengths of each species' military tradition. Within 3 days, the first truly integrated multi-species combat exercise was conducted, Zorvan precision weaponry coordinated through Mavorian sensory networks, deployed according to Crixian stealth doctrines, all orchestrated through a command structure that blended hierarchy with situational flexibility in ways no single species had previously imagined. The results surpassed even the most optimistic projections. "It's working better than we anticipated," Dr. Mitchell confided to Admiral Crestol as they observed the exercise results. "The complementary nature of your different evolutionary approaches creates capabilities greater than the sum of their parts, but only when coordination isn't hampered by dominance conflicts." The Admiral's tertiary brain, now fully engaged in analytical processing, had begun developing what he termed contextual hierarchy theory, a framework that preserved clear command structures during combat operations while allowing fluid reorganization during planning and innovation phases. "Your human gift," he observed, "is not the absence of hierarchy but understanding when hierarchy serves function and when it impedes it." As the alliance expanded and preparations accelerated, Admiral Vextor found himself increasingly drawn to observe the operations aboard the inevitable Conquest. Despite maintaining traditional protocols on his own vessels, he could not ignore the demonstrably superior results being achieved through these hybrid organizational structures. The transformation reached a pivotal moment when a Zorvan junior engineer from Vextor's fleet, working alongside a human quantum physicist, developed a revolutionary shield harmonization technique that increased defensive capacity by 63% across all Allied vessels. When Admiral Vextor witnessed his Supreme Hierarch personally commending this junior officer, bypassing 3 command levels in a previously unthinkable breach of protocol, he recognized that fundamental change had become inevitable regardless of the enforcement fleet's original mission. On the 28th day after the confluence formation, long-range sensors detected the first unmistakable signatures of Nexary scout vessels entering the outer reaches of the solar system. As alert signals cascaded through the Allied fleet, Admiral Krestol gathered his now thoroughly integrated command staff, Zorvan, Human, Mavorian, Crixian, and representatives from 5 other species, around the central tactical display. The true test approaches, he announced, his 3 hearts beating in synchronized determination rather than conflicted uncertainty. What we have built here transcends mere tactical alliance. We have created something unprecedented, a cooperative framework that preserves the strengths of our different cultures while transcending their limitations. Dr. Mitchell nodded in agreement, her expression reflecting both pride in humanity's contribution and solemn recognition of the challenge ahead. The Nexari dominated because they exploited the inability of hierarchical species to adapt quickly or coordinate across cultural boundaries. They never encountered a multi-species force capable of both structured response and creative adaptation. As the command staff dispersed to final preparation stations, Lieutenant Vriss approached the Admiral. Her exoskeleton, once rigid with traditionalist certainty, now held a more nuanced posture that human observers had begun to recognize as indicating philosophical growth. "Admiral," she said quietly, "I once feared these human concepts would destroy what makes us Zorvan. I now understand they may be what preserves our civilization against extinction. The Supreme Hierarch has requested my formal assessment of these methodologies for potential implementation throughout the Confederation." Admiral Krestol regarded his once staunchest critic with all 3 eyes. "And what will you recommend, Lieutenant?" Vriss's mandibles arranged themselves in a pattern so rarely seen among Zorvans that it took the Admiral a moment to recognize it, the configuration denoting evolutionary revelation. "That we have discovered something more powerful than conquest, Admiral. We have discovered transcendent cooperation, and it may be the only force in the galaxy capable of standing against what comes." Nexari arrived in full force on what Earth calendars would mark as October 17th, a date that would eventually be commemorated across 17 star systems as Confluence Day. Their fleet materialized from hyperspace like a metallic storm cloud, 327 vessels of varying configurations but unified purpose, the systematic conquest and assimilation of all sentient life in this sector of the galaxy. From the command deck of the inevitable conquest, Admiral Krestol observed the incoming armada with a calm that would have been unthinkable to his former self. "Exactly as the historical records described," noted Commander Blackwell, studying the tactical display where Nexari formations unfolded with mechanical precision. They're arranging into their traditional conquest configuration, central command vessels surrounded by tiered defensive screens with assault units positioned for sequential deployment. What the tactical display also showed, however, was something the Nexari could not possibly have anticipated: the Allied fleet's response formation, developed through thousands of simulations incorporating both traditional military doctrines and revolutionary human organizational theories. Rather than arranging into species-specific battle groups as interstellar conflicts had always done previously, the Allied vessels had organized into function-based units that transcended biological and cultural boundaries. Zorvan heavy cruisers paired with Mavorian sensor platforms and Crixian stealth coordinators. Human tactical officers embedded on vessels throughout the fleet, serving as adaptive interface specialists to facilitate real-time organizational reconfiguration as battle conditions evolved. Phase 1 initiating, announced Lieutenant Vriss, who now served as integration coordinator, a position that would have been incomprehensible in traditional Zorvan hierarchy but had proven essential to the Alliance's operational capability. The first wave of Allied vessels surged forward, not in the direct confrontational approach the Nexari clearly anticipated, but in what Professor Hamilton had termed structured asymmetry, an attack pattern that appeared chaotic to outside observers but followed complex game theory matrices designed to force the Nexari into predictable defensive responses. The Nexari Central Command, faced with this unprecedented approach, responded exactly as the simulations had predicted, redirecting their forward defensive screen to counter the perceived primary threat vectors while simultaneously deploying secondary units to protect their flanks from what they assessed as opportunistic strikes. "They're following historical patterns," confirmed Dr. Wilson, who had spent weeks analyzing archaeological records of ancient Nexari conquests. 5,000 years of undefeated expansion has reinforced their tactical rigidity. They have no evolutionary pressure to adapt because adaptation has never been necessary for their survival. As the battle unfolded across the solar system, the true innovation of the Alliance became increasingly apparent. While each individual species might have been overwhelmed by the Nexari's superior numbers and technology, their combined approach created something entirely new, a responsive, adaptive command structure that could reconfigure itself faster than the Nexari could assess and counter. When Crixian stealth tactics proved unexpectedly effective against Nexari sensor arrays, additional resources were immediately redirected to support this advantage without requiring authorization through multiple command levels. When a Mavorian defensive technique failed against a particular Nexari weapon system, the affected vessels seamlessly transitioned to a backup protocol developed by human Zorvan engineering teams. The Nexari, encountering this fluidity for the first time in their long history of conquest, began showing signs of strategic confusion. Their formations, initially precise and coordinated, grew increasingly disjointed as their traditional response patterns failed to produce expected results. They're attempting to adapt, observed Admiral Vextor, who had voluntarily integrated his enforcement fleet into the Alliance command structure after witnessing the effectiveness of these new methodologies. But their organizational structure appears to impede rapid tactical evolution. Dr. Mitchell nodded in agreement. That's the critical insight we discovered in our psychological research. Rigid hierarchies excel at executing established strategies but struggle with novel challenges that require cross-disciplinary innovation. The Nexari conquered because they never encountered resistance that required them to fundamentally change their approach. The turning point came 7 hours into the battle, when a joint Zorvan human Mavorian task force identified a previously undetected vulnerability in the Nexari communication network, a quantum resonance pattern that, when properly disrupted, cascaded throughout their command structure. The discovery itself was remarkable enough, but more significant was how it occurred. A human theoretical physicist collaborating with a mid-rank Zorvan weapons officer and a Mavorian sensory specialist, all three working outside their designated roles in a problem-solving session that would have been impossible under traditional hierarchical constraints. As the Allied fleet implemented this discovery, targeting the Nexari command vessels with precisely calibrated disruption pulses, the effect was dramatic and immediate. The once coordinated Nexari formations disintegrated into isolated battle groups, their ability to maintain strategic cohesion shattered by an attack vector they had never evolved defenses against. Open a communication channel to the primary Nexari command vessel, Admiral Krestol ordered, his 3 eyes fixed on the tactical display where enemy ships were now attempting to regroup. All frequencies, all translation protocols. When the channel established, the beam that appeared on the view screen shocked even the multi-species command staff. The Nexari commander, if that term was even appropriate, appeared as a collective biological network rather than an individual entity, multiple semi-transparent structures interconnected through pulsating neural channels. "You have disrupted our unity," the collective entity stated, its translated voice carrying harmonics that suggested multiple perspectives speaking in unison. This has not occurred in 7,412 conquest cycles. Admiral Krestol stepped forward, flanked by representatives from each allied species, a visual representation of the very cooperative philosophy that had achieved this unprecedented victory. "We offer terms," he declared. "Withdrawal from this sector in recognition of our territorial boundaries. In exchange, we will share understanding of how we achieved today's outcome." The Nexari collective pulsated in patterns that the translation systems struggled to interpret. "You offer knowledge? Not submission?" "We offer evolution," Dr. Mitchell interjected, stepping alongside the Admiral. "Your conquest methodology succeeded for millennia because you encountered only species organized through rigid hierarchies similar to your own, merely less advanced. We represent something different, adaptive cooperation that preserves individual strengths while transcending individual limitations." The Nexari communication abruptly terminated, but the tactical display showed their vessels ceasing offensive operations and assuming a neutral formation. 6 hours later, after what appeared to be extensive internal deliberation, the Nexari collective reopened communication channels with an unprecedented request. They wished to send observer units to study this adaptive cooperation concept. The war ended not with the extinction of either side, but with the beginning of a transformation more profound than military victory. The Nexari, undefeated for millennia, encountering an idea powerful enough to challenge their fundamental understanding of interspecies relations. In the weeks that followed, as the Allied fleet maintained vigilant observation of the gradually withdrawing Nexari vessels, Admiral Krestol found himself summoned to an extraordinary session of the Zorvan High Command. The Supreme Hierarch, flanked by the full hierarchical council, received him not with the expected censure for protocol violations but with a formal ceremony rarely witnessed in Zorvan history, the rite of evolutionary recognition. Admiral Krestol, the supreme hierarch intoned, mandibles arranged in the ancient pattern denoting civilization-altering discovery, your willingness to explore methodologies beyond our traditional understanding has revealed a path forward that none could have anticipated. The Council has unanimously approved the establishment of a permanent interspecies cooperation directive, with you as its first High Administrator. The Admiral's 3 hearts beat in perfect synchronization as he accepted this unprecedented honor. Yet his greatest satisfaction came not from personal recognition but from witnessing the broader transformation already spreading throughout Zorvan society. Junior officers now encouraged to contribute ideas regardless of rank, cross-disciplinary research teams forming spontaneously around complex problems, traditional hierarchy maintained where it served function while yielding to cooperative models where adaptation was required. 1 year after the Battle of Earth, as humans now called it, Admiral Krestol, now High Administrator Krestol, stood aboard the observation deck of the renamed vessel Inevitable Cooperation, watching as representatives from 23 different species gathered for the formal establishment of what would become known as the Confluence Compact. Beside him stood Dr. Eleanor Mitchell, recently appointed as Earth's first ambassador to the Compact. "Did you anticipate this outcome when you first came aboard my warship?" he asked, his tertiary eye focused on her expression. Dr. Mitchell smiled, an expression he had come to recognize as indicating both satisfaction and thoughtful reflection. "We hoped for survival, but this transcends our highest aspirations. What you've helped create here isn't just an alliance but a new model of civilization, one that values both structure and flexibility, both individual identity and collective capability." "The most profound discovery," the administrator replied, "was not that hierarchy is unnecessary, but that it must serve function rather than tradition, that organizational structures should adapt to challenges rather than forcing challenges to conform to established patterns." As the ceremony commenced below, with species that had been mortal enemies now engaged in collaborative governance discussions, Lieutenant Vriss, now Director of Interspecies Integration, joined them at the viewport. "The Nexary observers have submitted their first formal analysis of our organizational methodologies," she reported. "They request permission to establish a permanent diplomatic presence within the Compact. Their exact phrasing is, noteworthy." She handed the Admiral a data crystal containing the translated message. Its concluding statement would eventually be inscribed above the entrance to the Compact's Central Assembly Chamber. "In 5,000 years of conquest, we encountered countless species but only one civilization capable of transcending its component limitations. We come not to conquer but to learn the human concept of cooperation without subjugation, perhaps the most powerful force yet discovered in our galaxy." Administrator Krestol gazed out at the stars beyond the viewport, reflecting on the remarkable journey from conquest to cooperation. His former self would have viewed the current proceedings as chaotic, disorderly, inefficient, yet the measurable outcomes in technological advancement, resource utilization, and quality of existence for all participant species demonstrated precisely the opposite. The humans had not offered a replacement for hierarchy but rather a contextual understanding of when hierarchy served function and when it impeded adaptation, a psychological insight so profound that it had transformed not just interspecies relations but the evolutionary trajectory of galactic civilization itself. The amazing discovery, he mused aloud, was not merely how human psychology revolutionized our understanding of cooperation, but how that understanding revolutionized us all.